Right there, that's the zoom. If you double click it, that does the dot. If you double click it, it changes. So it does the highlight. If you double click it again, it does the blow up.
He wants a dot, don't you?
Mostly.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. I want to thank everybody for the preliminary work, and I'm very proud of the staff and everything, and looking forward to this budget. It's going to be the easiest budget we put together this year, and so we're excited. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our new city manager, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. You set the bar very high, Mayor. Today is the first of 3 budget work sessions that we will conduct. Preston, are you running the slideshow? No worries. Thank you. The purpose of our presentation today is continuation of the April 11th, 2024 work session when Council presented 3 projects: the fire station number 4, the police station, and a recreation project. Council requested that staff take a look at the park south of the interstate and a recreation facility as 2 separate projects. So today you'll see those are separated projects. Based on the feedback that we received back in April, staff today is providing construction and operating cost estimates for these projects and for 2 other projects. Estimated tax rates that we show in this presentation are only to illustrate what the potential tax increase could be. These tax increases that you will see are not recommendations. For projects that move forward, staff would explore other potential funding options, and the tax rate that we are showing today would fund debt, not actually to pay for the construction, but it would actually fund the debt to pay for them. We'll also want to talk about today the overview of changing economic factors. As you know, inflation still continues to be high. From last year, we talked about the percentage rate being 3.7. Between February 2024 and 25 of this year, it's been 2.8. So it has increased, but we still are seeing an increase of inflation. Expect to probably continue to do that throughout the year. With interest rates, the Fed has projected only 2 rate cuts this year as opposed to 4. And how that's impacted the city of Mebane are 2 ways. One, with the spillway, and with our wharf, we're paying higher interest rates that are impacting our debt payments. With the federal funding, with all the executive orders we're seeing at the presidential level, we are watching our funding to see how that may impact us. The only fund that right now we're really watching very closely is our EDA funding, which is about $500,000. At this point, it's there, but we're just watching closely on that to see if there may be some impact with that funding. And as you all know, West North Carolina was hit by Hurricane Helene And we anticipate there may be some impact at the state level in terms of funding and also competition for funding for other communities because of the funding going to Western North Carolina, and also may impact the availability of contractor projects we may put forth as well. We also want to ask the council to confirm the priority of our capital projects. We definitely need that input as we begin to continue developing the FY26 budget. And so when we get to this conversation and discussion today, we'll ask you to give us some feedback on which projects you'd like to see as our highest priorities to move forward. And then finally, we want to look at our fund balance, trends, and policy discussion. You recall when we did our audit presentation, we talked about our fund balance. And so you have the full presentation about the fund balance attached to this presentation today, but we'll talk about that more later when we get to that part in our discussion. With a growing city, it's critical that we develop a sustainable financial plan to support the needs of our community and balance capital projects with day-to-day service delivery and compensating our employees. Mebane's done a lot of things right. We're enjoying the benefits of visionary leadership, community engagement, and strong management. And so with continued careful planning and thoughtful planning, we want to ensure that our future remains positively charming. Today, we want you to consider these topics as part of your discussion. We put here our post-employment health insurance liability and police and fire separation liability, allowance liability, and the fund balance conversation because the payment for these items could impact the funding for these projects you see before you today. But the first three items you see are those that we presented back in April. So we refined the numbers that we presented in April to show you those today. And the two other potential projects we want to talk about also at Public Works and Public Utilities to build sheds to protect our equipment on that site, and also a future facility plan there as well. As I mentioned, we broke up the land acquisition for a park south of the interstate and an intergenerational recreation center. We want to talk about those numbers to potentially build that project. This will be a team effort, so there'll be several of us presenting today, including our assistant city manager, our finance director, our city engineer, our public works and public utilities directors, and our entire management team is here as well to answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I'll turn it over to our assistant city manager, to our finance director, who will get us started on these topics.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to go over our health insurance liability and then also our separation allowance liability. So first, I wanted to start by going over what our policy is. So right now, for a retiree, someone to retire from the city and receive health insurance benefits through the city in retirement, an employee has to retire with 15 years of service with the city, retire directly from city service with eligibility for immediate retirement benefits, and elect to receive immediate payment of benefits under the plan. And then when retired employees reach the age where they're eligible for Medicare, the coverage is converted into a Medicare supplement plan, and the city pays the supplement. So this data was provided by CAVMAC Actuarial Consulting Services, and this is showing our current retirees in the retiree line, and in the top line is active employees who are estimated to be retiring, and that's the top number. And then the total shows what our estimated liability is each year for the next 10 years. And as you can see, it's increasing over time, which is expected. So in 2035, it will get up to 543,000.
Sorry, Daphne. The active line is people that are currently active but would be retired in the years highlighted in the table.
Exactly. Exactly. So currently, we fund the retiree health insurance on a pay-as-we-go basis. So every year, it's put in our budget, and we don't have any savings to put towards this. It's just in the budget every year. So we wanted to take a look at this because as the liability grows, we want to look at maybe other options other than just paying as we go. We still want to pay as we go, but also maybe have something else, another mechanism that would help smooth things out on the years where the liability jumps up. So what staff is going to look at are potential funding mechanisms to assist with partial payments. And it will have some kind of a smoothing. We're hoping to have a smoothing effect. So an example of something that we may propose is, let me go back to the previous slide. So you see this is just an example. In 2030, the liability jumps up to 348,000. So potentially, we could say we'll fund through pay as we go up to 300,000, and then use a savings fund to fund the other 48,000. But what we would need to discuss is how much each year we're going to put into this savings fund to fund this liability. So that's all things that staff is going to be looking into. But that's what we would want to use the savings fund for, is to fund a certain amount out of the budget every year as pay-go, and then use this other savings type fund to kind of smooth things out for us. And then for the separation allowance, we're looked at the same thing, but I'll go through the policy as it stands now. For police, we both have police and fire separation allowances. So I won't read through this whole thing, but the officer has to complete 30 years or more credible service, and be 55 years of age and completed 5 or more years of credible service. It must not be yet be age 62. And so eventually payment of the separation allowance ceases when the officer reaches age 62 or dies or is reemployed. The fire separation allowance is similar, set up similarly, and would also end if the person dies or when they turn 62. Or go work for another local government system with some nuances there. So this is what CAVMAC Actuarial Consulting Services put together. You see the law enforcement officers on the top row and firefighters on the second row, and then the total of our liability going forward. And similarly, we'd like to look at not just doing a pay it as we go option, but to maybe set up a savings type account to smooth things out in years where the amount would jump up past a certain amount that we would want to fund on a yearly basis. So we just wanted to bring this to you to make you aware of the liability and that it has been calculated, and to let you know that that will be coming up in future years.
So if we,
Do we shop health insurance on a continual, well, not continual, but pretty regularly? One thing I found personally is that you sign on with somebody and 3 years later you realize, wait a minute, this thing has gone up 40%. So reviewing, you can make that. So we do that.
Yes, we do have a broker that assists us with that renewal every year.
Daphne, if we're trying to smooth things out and we expect them to be going up, especially in the first set of liabilities, basically what we're talking about is paying more now by putting money into savings, so it's not as big of a hit in the future.
Correct.
I guess, what's your vision for the interest rates to help smooth everything over? We're talking 2%, 0.5%?
You mean the interest rates on the savings
The
account?
savings, yeah.
So we would shop that around, but typically a lot of our savings, not all of it, but a lot of it is in North Carolina Capital Management Trust, where we have been getting a very good rate, like in the 4% range. But we would definitely shop around, the best place to put something.
That 4%, roughly 4% will help smooth things over at least a little
So
bit.
that all is dependent on interest rates in the economy.
That'd be
Okay.
tiny.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right. I'll turn this over to Preston.
All right. Y'all have a little bit of echoing today, so I'll try to keep this a little further back. But if y'all cannot hear me, or if Kirk says we cannot hear at home, just let me know. But these next three projects are actually what we have discussed in the past, three special projects that had the general fund tax increase a few years ago. It was heavily discussed in last budget cycle, as the city manager referenced. This year, you'll see the first slide looks similar, but we have added a second slide with much more detail. So you'll have that for reference and discussion, but first slide will look similar. Second slide will be some new additions with some of the information that was discussed verbally. But again, this is reference material to lead to discussion. So the first project based off of last year's April budget cycle that seemed to be the priority project in terms of the majority of council, and that can be corrected at the end if it's wrong. But from last meeting and follow-up was the future park project south of the interstate. And you'll notice in our later edition where that's actually split into two sections from guidance from council at their last budget work session. This Southside Park, south of the interstate park, dividing it into a category for purchase and also a category for construction as well. But for this point in the presentation, we're going to be focusing on the construction. The materials you see in front of you do not include the land purchase, but we do believe that some of the existing funding, or hope some of the existing funding from the previous capital reserve general fund balance, or not fund balance, but general fund capital reserve fund should help pay a significant portion of the purchase of that land. And again, we were understanding from council that they were looking at a park project similar to the style of park at Community Park, where it has athletics and recreation, and also incorporated the feedback from citizens in the recent recreation and parks master plan. So that's what's guided this analysis. We've throughout several of these projects, we have discussed these projects with our engineering department, where they have adjusted cost increase in their opinion. Also, the finance department has adjusted costs with inflation as well. Some of the others where we get more specific, we did consult with some vendors, but they'll be later in your agenda. So in this case, all of these, we are estimating cost, and you will see 16.8 million is what's estimated to build a style of park similar to Community Park, with some of the additions added from the Recreation Master Plan. Now, in full transparency, we're showing this cost, but this could be approached a phased approach park construction as well. So I'll share that, but we're showing the total cost at this point in time. In this case, we have been working diligently as staff since the last meeting to find locations for that style of park. We do not have one identified or prepared to present today. The cost would have to be determined on that. So again, we're focused on $16.8 million to build a community park style of park. So the second column you see on the right side, similar to last year, we do talk about that we feel like a park similar to Community Park would require one new position. It is based off of the 24-25 salary schedule. You'll see the maintenance associated with it, $36,050, and then the utilities associated with it there. I won't read the number. So we go to the next page as a point of reference in all this. In 24-25, a 1 cent property tax. And again, as the city manager said, this is not a recommendation. This is reference material for you, but a 1 cent property tax is the equivalent of $455,432. You'll see that on every slide. So on this, we have our estimated one-time cost on the left side, our estimated recurring cost on the other side. We did realize if this was the number one project, we should factor in that previous 2 cent tax increase for a general fund capital reserve. So that is factored into this and the estimated balance of it. But keep in mind, we think some of that balance would go towards the cost of purchasing the land. And these are estimates because we have not completed 24, 25, but the finance department does feel these are pretty reasonable numbers you'll see on that general capital reserve. But you will see the estimated debt there. Remember, we talked about 16.8 million. We factored in some of our reserves on that. And this park at that price, if it was not built in phases, and I stress again, it could be built in phases, you'll see the estimated yearly debt of a little bit over 1.1 million. And you'll see what it would constitute in a tax increase. Also, as staff, we tried to be fair on this estimated recurring cost. We did believe that we could absorb some of these costs with growth, so we did include that and factor into it. We factor that as well, and you will see the estimated tax increase to cover recurring cost beyond just as reference 0.14 cent. That is probably something, candidly, we probably could absorb, but we wanted to be transparent, have this data in front of you. But you will see at the bottom, I guess to be short, finance director, 2.67%, but that does not include the current. That's in addition to the 2 cent we already have, correct?
Correct.
So it would be an additional 2.67 cent increase to build what we estimate to be a community park style of park south of the interstate. However, there is the option to do phases, but that is a reference material for you here too. And a park can be built in phases. Now, phase one can be a little more expensive because you have to build basic necessities such as parking lot for sure, restrooms, unless we did portable restrooms, which may or may not be the best option, but I defer to other staff and council on that. But keep in mind, this could be split up, but that did seem to be the number one project, or as we understood it as staff, the number one project seemed to be identifying land and then construction. So we call that number one. Construction seemed to be 1B. So moving on to next
Preston,
one.
sorry, if I can ask a couple questions. What are we getting for $17 million? I mean, you said like the community park. I mean, we talking 2 turf soccer fields or, you know?
Very, very similar to community park. When community park was built, I believe it came in, the city engineer, correct me, but I believe its bid a few years ago was $12 million and that had to be cut back. So it would be very similar, some type of multi-purpose field. We have discussed that at the staff level going forward. Maybe we should look at, instead of specific fields, look at fields being multi-purpose where multiple sports can be played on them. Bathrooms, playgrounds, splash pad, pretty much everything that is at community park would be at this one as well. It'd be very much a duplicate. Candidly, or not candidly, I also add it'll probably be more parking that is than it's community park, because we have learned additional parking's needed there as well. So
Is that what the city needs, is a duplicate park? I mean, maybe there are needs that are not represented in the current community park, and that instead of duplicating, it should go in a different vein. Has that conversation been had or not yet?
we have had that conversation, but for today's purpose, we were following the
Yeah,
direction
fair
of council from last April, which was a similar style park. I'm not gonna say a duplicate, but a similar style park to community park. But I do agree with you, deviations can occur, and in many ways, from our discussions, fields being multi-purpose, those deviations are already being discussed. But I would agree with you if it does not have to be an exact duplicate. Staff's not recommending that, but we are following the model.
But basically, if we put in more outdoor basketball courts,
Yes, sir.
it wouldn't really radically change the price. So
No.
we can still think in these same.
I would say the cost of more outdoor basketball courts are a fraction of the cost of more outdoor soccer fields.
Right.
Is there not a demand for baseball fields, softball?
That's actually what
Other than
we
what we've
discussed.
got?
I can defer to the parks, probably should defer to the Recreation and Parks Director, but I think there's a demand for all types of fields.
Okay, yeah, you said
That's why we looked at-
multi-purpose, but it's soccer, lacrosse thing. But I would think the demand for baseball would continue to grow.
We have discussed at staff level a multi-purpose field concept that could be, and the Recreation and Parks Director, pending city manager approval, can speak more on this, but it could be a football field, a soccer field, a lacrosse field, a softball field, and a baseball field. 5 in 1. Now, if you're a purist and you want one field for one sport, that may not appeal to people with that perspective, but from a service delivery and efficiency, we have discussed designing the fields in a way where they could serve those 5 sports. I don't know if you want the Recreation and Parks Director to add anything to that.
Unless you have more to add, Evan, you good? He's good.
All right, no questions on that. I'll go to the next one. And again, anytime you have questions, please jump in. And of course, we can reference all of this at the end as well when prioritization discussion is occurring. And the second of the future projects that were discussed last April was Fire Station 4. We did do some updates on this again. We updated construction costs with inflation and what the engineer department recommended an increase. It added a little more information. You'll see it on the left-hand side. You see the cost of a building construction or station construction. You'll see some additional items that go along with that related to equipment and vehicles. In this case, we do have 2 sites that are identified for future fire stations. They were part of an approval process, one on the west side of the city, one on the east side. Were voluntary commitments from developers. They have not reached a point, to my knowledge, unless the city attorney says otherwise, that they have been transferred to us yet. The one on the east side is further along, and we think that transfer could occur at some point this year. The one on the west side is not as far along. We have shared in the past with you. That commitment was for it to be on the corner of Ralph Scott Parkway and Trollingwood Hallfields Road. The developer has come back and spoken with us about could that shift, could that property of equal size or maybe a little bit greater be shifted. We are open to that at the staff level. Both the current and former fire chief have participated in those discussions. They seem to be open, or the fire chief's open to it as well. It actually moves us closer to sewer availability. And I think the delay on that project relates more to discussions the developer is having with Duke Energy about the potential need or the potential in general of a future electrical substation. So we do not have a timeline on that yet, but on both of those sites, we do feel very good that they will be transferred to us at some point in the reasonable future. So,
Do we have a prioritization, east versus west, as well as a timeline that we would like to have the next station up and running?
so several factors on prioritization. I would probably defer to the city manager and fire chief. I think some of the discussion today and also analyzing our resource availability would play a key role in the timeline as well. So
I'm just curious what the prioritization is, east versus west, and I'm assuming we're doing pretty well right now, Chief, but what's your vision moving forward?
So great questions to answer that. Right now, the Senator Ralph Scott Station, which would be the western side, would be the focus due to our growth that's currently happening in that area, the projects we know that are coming, and we also have some extended response times currently in that area now from our current locations. Does that answer?
And is there a level of urgency at this time? Do we need the station tomorrow or in 10 years or?
I would say quicker the better.
Thank you.
I don't see fire trucks on here. Am I missing something? Maybe I should have asked the chief.
I'll let the chief answer that, but it's my understanding that the truck for this station has or will be arriving if Chief Wellens wants to speak on that.
Yeah, the truck for Fire Station 4 should be here the end of 25, December 25, January of 26. for that station.
We'll add real quick, it was, some of the staff notified me, I said $12 million was the cost for Community Park years ago. I think it was more closer to 10.5 or 11 million, so just in the, effort of transparency was off a little bit on that statement, so. You will see estimated recurring costs, so in this case, obviously a new station, it has to be staffed, on 3 shifts, so you will see the cost of the current, salary schedule, current fiscal year salary schedule. You'll see other estimated costs there as well, and of course, the standard building maintenance and utility estimates. So if we go to the next page again, you see the equivalent of a 1 cent property tax there. You will see on the right side, as we put the previous general fund capital reserve 2 cent to the park project, we did not include that in this slide because you cannot count the 2 cent on 2 projects. Obviously, later council can reprioritize and we would readjust these numbers to reflect that. But at this point going forward, it will not include that 2 cent. So you do see the estimated debt issue and estimated yearly payments. You'll see the equivalent of a 1 cent, a 1.32 cent tax increase. Then when you move to the estimated recurring cost, we do not believe that the numbers of staffing required for a new station is something growth in the next few years we'll be able to pay for. So that would result in a 3.29 cent tax increase, which you see at the bottom, for a total of being the equivalent of 4.61. So obviously, again, some growth could help with that, but this was done, as the city manager explained, to give you a formatting reference material. So any questions on that before we move along? Our final future project in those categories of 3 special projects is a police station. You will see again the same format as we discussed last year. It is talked about the ability of it being a 20,000 square foot building with the option to add on additional space in the future. So in this case, 20,000 with the ability to add 10,000 on. It is felt the site that has been identified for a police station can accommodate that square footage. So obviously, as the city grows and the city department grows, the building can grow with it as well. That is a need on this station versus the previous station or park. As mentioned, the site is identified and voluntarily committed via a voluntary condition. We have not reached a point of a donation yet. Similar to the fire station 2 sites, we do not necessarily have a time frame yet. We do know the developer is having discussions with us with construction plan approval on this one, and the city manager and others may add to the comment, but it has been discussed at the staff level. A new police station would result in obviously the police department relocating. It's been discussed that the city planning and inspections and fire marshal division of the fire department could move into the former police station. There is a few items or hurdles we have to jump over, maybe one really, and we are working on that. In that case, if planning and inspections moves to that building and also the fire marshal divisions, that frees up space in the fire station for offices, but it also frees up the building next door, known as the inspections building, for IT to move in that department and create what they would propose to be a dedicated data center, which in turn would bring all our servers from being satellite locations to one location. That is achievable now with Lumos Fiber, who we utilize. And of course, while they would take the original portion of the building, that frees up the 5 offices where the planning department is located. So the departments in City Hall could move there, and the offices that are vacated by IT moving over there as well too. So in a total, this project does provide what is listed as growing room for 8 departments for the city organization. So it is a multiplier effect with the construction of a new police station.
Preston, a question. No additional staff is required. Is that because they're just relocating as opposed to the fire station needing?
That's right. A new fire station requires personnel. Police stations, it would be the equivalent of moving from one house to another. They do not have to add any new family members or personnel for that. Now, we would expect the police station or the police department to grow in the future. That's why we have the ability. That's why we're tentatively proposing a 20,000 square foot facility, which is what we priced it on at 17.2 million, but the ability to add on 10,000 square feet in the future as well. So,
Okay, thank
but
you.
a new station for the police department does not necessitate additional personnel right away. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
For the data center concept, and I may be jumping the gun and that may be coming up later. I guess I was curious, just from the perspective of IT security and, is it better to have all of our servers and whatnot in one location versus having them in separate locations?
If I speak incorrectly, I think the IT director is welcome to correct me, but I think it is, I think it's more efficient and safer. And that is not going to be part of this presentation
Okay.
beyond this point because it will be a relatively low cost to create a data center in the existing building. So, but yes, it is, it does. And the IT director can correct me, but I think it does create opportunities of a safer operation, but also a more efficient operation, as well as freeing up satellite locations in the buildings where we currently have servers at.
Okay, that was gonna be my other question, was the satellite locations. They're still city property, it's just different buildings.
Yes.
And we also build in duplication in our system as well. So if something were to happen in that site, it's backed up in a way that we could still hopefully operate. Kurt, feel free to jump in there, but
Yeah, so the main process, excuse me, the main process is that what we're trying to do is that each location we have now, we have servers at like the fire department and police department and so forth. And to be able to keep a safe environment, we will consolidate into one environment, but we also will have replication and stuff. I'm working with other municipalities to see about having like a co-location so that we can actually replicate our data in another data center. So if anything happens here, we have backup capability at their location as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Sounds like there's still some questions about the land acquisition. Do we have, it doesn't need, I don't need an answer right now, but do we have some estimations for the future of when we are going to get these three pieces of land? Fire station, police?
So to clarify, I don't think we have any questions about we will receive the land because that was a voluntary condition. It'd have to come back before council to change. But no, we are dependent upon when they do their construction. We knew that at the time of the approval by council, and that was discussed. The key thing is in the situation with the police station and the eastern site for a fire station, public roads had to be constructed. So before we can accept the property, we wanted to make sure the roads were constructed to provide public access to the property. So, but at this point in time, I can't give you a timeline, but we are at the staff level. We have not reached a point where we believe the individual developer's timeline is going to slow down our ability to fund the project.
I guess that's what I'm really asking. Okay, gotcha.
We would think funding would take a longer process. If that answers your question, than the developer will on the project. So.
Okay.
I have a question going back to the park south of the interstate and how you're incorporating the 2-cent capital reserve into those calculations. Can you go through that again? Because I'm a little confused.
So on the slide before, for the 16.8 for the construction, and then the next slide. So that's, oops, I'm sorry, that's taking it off of the debt issue.
Okay. But the 2-cent will still exist for the next 10, 15 years. Doesn't it help us pay the debt in perpetuity as well? Or how should we incorporate that into our thinking?
So the 2.53 is to cover the debt. And it would be higher if we didn't use the 1 point, almost 8, I mean, almost 7.
Let me rephrase my question. What are we doing with that capital reserve money after one of these projects is implemented?
So it will continue to grow and you can use it for one of these other projects. Because when we set up the capital reserve fund, the capital ordinance said that it was being put aside for capital projects, and we specifically listed these 3. Council can change that to be used on other projects as well, but it can only be used for capital. So we were just, in order to make this less confusing of a discussion and to kind of keep it a cleaner discussion, we're estimating the balance on 6/30/25 and just applying it to the one project, but it will continue to build up and can be used for future projects.
So that 2 cents cannot be used to pay the debt on any of these projects or to fund the staff. It can only be used as capital to initiate a project?
It can only be used for capital because it's in a capital reserve fund and yeah.
But he's asking. 5, I think.
So are you talking about the 2 cent in the general capital reserve or the 2.53 tax increase?
I'm talking about the 2 cents in the general capital
Right,
reserve, but
yes.
not as of 6/30/25, but the 2 cents that we keep
Correct.
building after 6/30/25.
Yeah, it can only be used for capital projects, but it can be used for any capital projects.
But I think your question is if council voted to, well, it's used for capital project. I think your question is, could that 2 cent go towards the 2.67 cents?
That is my question. Can we use that 2 cents
Yeah.
in the future
Pay debt.
to pay debt or to pay for firefighters or not?
I will double check,
because
but
of
I
the
do
way
not think you can use it for debt. It's the statutes are very specific that once it goes into a general capital reserve fund, it has to be used on capital and not debt for capital.
I think
But what I think the point is, we use what had been built up to pay for capital, but we decided to take the 2 cent that we're putting in the capital reserve now and just apply it in the future to the general tax base and do away with the capital reserve account. We could do that. We don't
You-
have to keep 2 cent going to capital reserve for the rest of our lives.
You don't, but whatever's in there can only be used for capital. So
Exactly.
whatever time you would stop that, whatever's in there can't be moved to the general fund, but you can stop.
Okay, so, okay.
Take a vote.
So council could
Right,
make
it
a
would take-
motion to
yeah.
move that 2 cents into general fund to help pay for the ongoing expenses of one of these projects, but that would have to be a council action.
Correct.
That way you wouldn't have much of a tax increase.
I'm going to add a quick
Right.
question just to add a wrinkle to this too.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've got our 3 identified, I guess, topics or branches that we were considering using the capital reserve fund for, right? But let's say we achieve these 3 goals or 3 projects, and then we still have that capital reserve fund. Would we then be able to say, hey, we want to keep the fund, but we would like to use it towards a project for a different department?
Yes, you can do that
Okay.
as long as it's capital. Yeah.
By vote.
Yeah, by a vote. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
So what other mechanisms do we have to get some of this money besides tax increases?
Yeah, that hadn't been identified yet, but when we get to the end, that's what we're going to talk about, is that
Okay.
staff will be looking at many other funding options that's available to us to fund these projects.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, I'd like to see the option of lumping all 3. And I know we could only do offset the construction costs, but that would bring the tax increase down to 3.5% roughly. Looking at a bond issue for the 3 projects. And of course, the other way, we're just financing the debt for an extended period anyway. One way's financing it, one way's a bond issue.
Yes, we will explore all those options. I guess while we're looking for the priority here to figure out how to move forward, but we will look at as many ways we could to figure out how to finance these projects and as minimum as we could.
Well, I think that's an excellent way to go. Burlington just showed, if we spend this $17 million on this facility, your taxes are going up 3 cents and the people vote. And that is a excellent way of getting funding. I mean, we stand a chance that they did not pass, but, it's a great way of doing it. So people know ahead of time what to expect versus, oh, by the way, your taxes are going up. Yeah, so.
I would need an education on the pros and cons of bond funding. Since I've never been involved in it, I'm sure there's some unintended or maybe intended consequences, but
I would have,
I know you all will educate us if we're going to consider it.
I would have concerns about like our, mission critical safety infrastructure being left up to.
If y'all address that, if Mr. Mayor and Mr. Manager, I'll move on to this one. So second slide again, similar format. You'll see the debt issue, the yearly debt, and the equivalent of a tax increase. Again, as we started, there is going to be growth revenues to help with these, but we also have to combat those factors the city manager referenced at the beginning, those economic factors, both that are financial measures and indirect impacts, such as the results of the focus on Western North Carolina going forward. So the second slides were new this year, more detail, more reference for you, leads to more discussion, more planning. We did have this slide last year. We tried to simplify it. These are the 3 previously discussed projects. You'll see again the total cost. You'll see the equivalent of it to a tax increase. Again, that is factoring some things that we were able to fund, such as a position for the park, and largely all 3 projects absorbing the cost of maintenance and utilities, because we do feel like the growth of our budget should be able to cover that. So you'll see those numbers at the top. You'll see the finance department calculated this on a 20-year term based off of the interest rate we received on the Lake Michael Spillway project. That could be different if it went the route of a bond, as was previously referenced. But there are also additional factors of going the route of a bond as well too. And to Councilmember White's point, we would probably take a similar route of expiration on that as we did with our financial consultants, Davenport, on the revenue bonds for our recent utility projects as well. So I will say, in all of these, as Councilmember Ewing asked earlier, we do not think these are things, and the city manager may want to expand on it more. We do not think any of these 3 projects, either design or construction, are going to be in next fiscal year budget, if I'm correct on that.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
I will alleviate that concern or that reference as well, but going back to financial planning for a big project like this, whether it's bond or some other avenue or alternative ideas, it takes time, and time is usually in the process of years, not months. So in studying some of these, but you'll see that information. If there's any questions in that, we can take those. We do have some other projects that we're going to go over that we felt like had been discussed in the past and recently, or were referenced or needed to be referenced in this. Council was aware, similar to the 2 liability discussions, financial matters that council needed to have available for their reference and consideration in this prioritization. So, but is there any questions at this point in time for myself or staff on these 3 previously discussed projects?
How do we calculate the impact of growth on our ability to fund these? Because our population's not going to be flat.
We will continue to grow. There is, it's not the easiest because there is a delay factor the
Right.
project's approved, as we've discussed in the past, it does not immediately begin. It also has to go through getting on the county tax rolls as well. Some of these large industrial projects, we typically, and the city manager may want to comment on this, but we estimate approximately 3 years before they show up on the tax records. Sometimes from the night of approval by council, sometimes from construction plans. It's just the nature of large projects. We are estimating that we will be having approximately 400 new front doors a year. So that is a factor for us. But when you estimate on industrial or commercial growth, that is a harder factor because that's not as constant. Those projects don't happen every month or every year. And then also, there is questions about could there be slowdown due to economic considerations at the national or state level. So I shared all that to say we are trying to project those numbers. That is not what we had to present to you today from our preparation, but it is not an easy discussion, but we are trying to figure that out. We look at historical data and we also try to project the forthcoming projects on where they are with building permits and COs as well. So we do it every year on projecting our utility and inspection revenues, and we try to get those as accurate as possible. Some years we are spot on, some years we're off. So we can factor that into this future discussion and education, and as you referenced and the city manager referenced.
Right. Well, the new front doors are expensive in terms of services as well. So we would somehow need to factor in, how many cents on the dollar we get towards projects from residential growth. But then with the industrial growth, it's very lumpy and we don't know when's going to come. But we can probably have a good sense of what industrial projects could come on the rolls in the next 3 to 5 years, because if we don't know anything about it now, it's not going to happen in the next 3 years. That's for sure.
I have a question. You may have already answered it, but the incentives that were due with the projects that we have approved, we had asked for a listing probably a year or so ago to see what increments we're in as far as the incentives coming in. Is that taken into an account, or is,
So
you
I don't
understand what I'm
recall,
saying?
I understand what you're saying. I do not recall staff being requested to prepare a list like that. I may have missed it, or it may have been with the previous
It was
city
previous
manager.
It was.
But we do have that, but the city attorney can speak on our incentive packages, but we base it off of tax collections as well, what we pay out. So we try to make sure, if you can.
Because I'd
confirm
asked
with
for it
city attorney,
twice before. You may not have known that, but just to see.
all I can say, it was not requested of me,
Okay.
but I know our incentives are designed for us to, through state statutes, collect more than what we pay out as a whole. But do you want to elaborate on that, Mr. Brown?
I think we can get that data fairly quickly to the council. But yes, you are correct. We're not spending more than we're bringing in by any stretch on any of these incentives. And most of them have worked well.
They're coming in pretty much on time as they promised us. That's what I'm getting at.
There's been a little delay in a couple of the employment numbers on a couple of them, but the money coming to us, it has been consistent. The money we have to pay out is based upon their performance, and sometimes they're not getting us the data as quickly as we want it, so we don't pay till we get the data.
But we remind them that we need it.
Yes.
Thank you.
And also I'll add, when we present incentives to council, we show what they are projecting and show what the max, in many cases, and Mr. Brown can speak on this, what the max payout would be and what we collect as well too. We show that when we bring incentives before council as well too. And what happens could happen is if the max is not achieved, the incentive payout goes down as well too on that. So, and that's pretty standard in North Carolina.
There's a figure missing, I guess, to make the math easier for me. You got $41,911,800 for the total of capital reserve funds to be used to build these three projects. And you're calculating 6.74% tax rate. What is the debt service annually on that 41 million, 42 million? Is that where you're getting the tax increase from?
Yes, we're getting the tax increase from the debt.
So we take what 6.74 cents would generate over 20 years, and that's what and divide it by 20, and that's the annual debt service.
Yeah, well, it's also provided on the slides, but yeah.
Where's the debt service?
Yeah, the estimated debts on each slide.
So in the police station, you see estimated yearly debt, 1.3 million.
So but do you have that added together for the total?
Not on that
No.
slide, we can provide
No,
that
I
to
can
you,
provide
but-
it to you.
But we do have it on every individual slide, so.
Yeah, I'll get that to you.
Well, you set the 41.2 or 42 million aside. What we need to look at is what's going to cost annually to pay for these buildings, and compare that to the growth rate, which has been over a period of years, and then you calculate whether what percentage of growth is going to cover. That's easier for me to do than trying to divide 42 million and figure out what the debt service is on the total. But,
I think it's gonna be right at 3 million.
Yeah, and if I could just point out too, I think the goal of today was just to give you a sense of the magnitude of cost. We have a lot of work to do in terms of refining these numbers and the impact on the budget. We just want to get a feel from the bigger picture of these projects and where your interest might be. That will give us an opportunity to go back now and begin to figure out a financial plan of how we get there.
Well, this data is very helpful, at least to me.
well, growth is a good thing, but it's also a misnomer in fact that growth causes the need for capital investments. We wouldn't need another fire station if we didn't have growth. We wouldn't need a police station if we didn't have growth. We wouldn't need another park if we didn't have growth. So when you say we're hoping growth will pay from some of this, growth's also going to create additional resource needs, staffing, which is an annual thing, and additional capital reserve projects in the future, whether it's Station 5 or multifaceted recreational facility or whatever. So I would like to see the funding options though for get to that point.
So if no other questions on that, we do have a few other potential projects we've listed. Some have been discussed recently, some have been discussed in the past. We did feel like with consideration, given the placing of these three projects, these other items, and looking at the two liabilities and fund balance situation, we do have two others we'll present. The next one related to public works and public utilities, shed number 1, and public works and public utilities future facility plan. Our city engineer, Franz Holt, will be presenting that. Obviously, the staff that's discussed up to this point will be involved in it, but also our two directors from those departments will be available for questions as well. So at this point, we'll ask city engineer Franz Holt to come forward to present the next slide. Section, sorry.
Thank you, Preston. Mayor, council. So I think over the last couple of years, we've been working together, Chuck and Kyle, on developing a plan. I hadn't called it a 10-year plan, but that's what we think it may be, with some needs more immediate than others. So on this slide, what we did was take where are we today? On the map, you'll see the numbering of, I knew I'd do it. You gonna do it? You see the numbering of buildings. If you go out on site, where we say building number 1, it's on the building now. Thanks, Chuck. Building number 2 and building number 3 the same way, and equipment shed 1 and equipment shed 2, same way. You'll notice on the slide as well that we have a certain acreage inside the fence. It's about 3.96 acres. And the total public works property is 17.33 acres. If you recall, when we were looking at the WRF project, that we divided the WRF from the public works site, and each one sits on its own property acreage. The most interesting aspect of this slide is the area in transition. When Crowder Construction was awarded the contract for the WRF expansion and upgrade project, they came to us and said, hey, we need an area that we can lay down some materials for the WRF project. We needed an area for parking. We needed an area for job trailers. And we bounced around several areas, and they said, well, let's look at this area, which is labeled area in transition. That's an area where we've been stockpiling some dirt and compost, over years and years of time. And they said they would clean that area up, push that stockpile area of compost and dirt into a central location, and which we all thought was great because it would prep the property for future uses. But it happened to be an area that we wanted to build equipment shed number 1. So we talked to them further about removing that material, and that's what is happening today. So essentially, in the next few weeks, this area will look totally different from what it does today, or does on that photo. In planning the area, we looked at the immediate needs that Preston mentioned, which is equipment shed number 1. You see it referenced on the site with the number 1. That's a 16,000 square foot shed opened on two sides and with the ends enclosed. These are intended to be sheds that you drive through, 10 to 12 bays. But they're drive-through. They do have lights. They do have a concrete floor. That's one of our immediate needs. The other is we would want to combine 2 and 3, which you see on the right, in the existing building, and that is to create a new entrance into Public Works. If you go there now, you go in the door that's kind of in the center of the garage bays, and then you cross behind equipment and whatnot, make your way over to the offices and et cetera. Yes, the public has to go in that way, and it's would be safer and more inviting if they had a new foyer entrance that does take up an office, and that office would be relocated in the same building. The other one is expanding building number 2. That is an area that we want to have the sign shop in, and Kyle had mentioned to me earlier, what other items would you do in that building?
That's gonna be heated storage, heated and climate controlled. We have equipment that we have to keep indoors in the wintertime to keep from freezing. Our sewer jetter, our vac truck, water trailers, things like that, asphalt roller. All that stuff has to be kept inside. Otherwise it'll freeze and break the equipment. So we're currently moving other trucks and equipment out of our existing shop bays in the wintertime and bringing those in at night just to store them to where we won't have any future problems with them.
Thank you. Another building is a 5,000 square foot warehouse building, which is denoted as number 5. Number 6 is another equipment storage shed. Number 7 actually looks at expanding the offices over there with a meeting room, additional restrooms, additional offices and storage. Number 8 at the north side of the site in green is additional bays to be able to work on equipment. And number 9 are storage bins under roof. We do show some additional parking that is needed. If you go over there early in the morning, you'll find a hard time finding a parking space.
Couple questions, Mr. Kyle Smith. Can you, I'm not saying right now, but is there a possibility you could provide some examples or lessons learned in the past where maybe those pieces of equipment were not heated and
I got a prime one, yeah.
there we go.
So one that just happened for us, as you all know, with our recent snowstorm event, we brined the streets ahead of that event. Our brine tank is a pressurized tank, many valves, whatnot in that. We actually had it outside. We brought it inside, but the little bit of time it was outside during the day, some of those valves and whatnot froze on us. So the next day we tried to use it, and those valves were cracked. So lesson learned on that. We quickly got those replaced and got the equipment back out on the road. But that's a prime need right there.
And building off of that, buildings 1 and 6, will those be offering additional capabilities for repair or specialized storage? What additional?
So I think that they are large enough buildings. Whether we build 10 bays or 12 bays, there are areas in between the columns and whatnot that can be used for storage and other uses. And that's one of the reasons why they wanted to have a concrete floors on both of those buildings as well for storage.
I didn't know if it would open us up to additional vehicle repair or different types of vehicle repair. Not saying we're going to have a bus, but I'm not sure if this would allow for larger vehicle maintenance, repair, or anything along that line. Sounds like just additional bays. Long story short.
Yeah, I think equipment protection was the biggest goal for these sheds.
Well, it does increase the life of the equipment to be stored. Contractors have been doing that for years, storing their equipment when they're not using it. And they have proven that is a cost savings to them in the future thing. So, it's an excellent idea. And as expensive as the equipment is now that you're buying, it is probably more urgent than we've seen in the past. So it's worth doing.
Yeah, it's expensive, and sometimes with supply chain issues, it's not easily replaceable either.
So we'll go on to the priority map. I can get this right. Made sense to number the buildings and whatnot to follow along with the priority. So that's where we came up with the numbering of the buildings. What you'll see in that yellow beige is the first stage and the most important need for public works and utilities, and that's that first shed. The actual exiting of the building kind of overlaps into the area of the second shed, but just for dividing up purposes, that's why it's drawn this way. And so on and so forth, as you see, it follows along with the numbering that was provided. There will come a point in time when we go to do shed number 2 that we want to expand that lay down area. So it takes the fence that we have now and probably shifts it out another 100 feet or so on property that we already own. And looking at the cost, I think Preston mentioned earlier that we had other folks who are in the business of building these facilities help with pricing. My project team obviously met and looked at what we thought the costs were, and then we then provided these same documents to have other folks start helping us with some pricing, some detailed work in pricing, and we've also asked a couple of local contractors. All in all, we think it's around $8 million for this facility. Obviously, the most important items that we'd like to see done together are 1, 2, and 3, and 4. That's in the, I guess, proposed 5-year CIP. Those total about $1.765 million. And right now, the shed is a little bit more expensive than original anticipation when the CIP was put together, 5-year CIP. And so it falls short of what's listed now by about $300,000, but those costs are shown on the slide as well. We'll be happy to take any other questions that you have on this, and I know there's another slide that accompanies this aspect.
And I'll add, similar to the park project that was shown, this is something we recognize that could be built in phases. We're not proposing it all at once. Even the shed project, we've had internal discussions. Could the shed be a concrete floor, and instead of the paving occur around it, could it just be gravel? Our directors are open to that. That could help lower some cost. Obviously, this is something, reflects back to what Mayor Pro Tem Bradley said. As an organization adds more police cars, we have to have more space for those police cars to be serviced at Public Works. When Councilmember Ewan referenced, incidents that happens, we add more equipment and we need more heated bays, to Mr. Smith's comment about the vehicle. Sometimes vehicles have to be pulled out for the work to occur in our fleet maintenance area as well. It can't be storage 24 hours when we're having to service vehicles during the daytime as well too. So similar to both the park project and this one, we're looking at alternatives. One of those is phasing, whether it's, we mentioned earlier, you said something about a bond. That could be the case, but also some of these projects might be done in phases to lower that cost as well too. Could be that cost factors out more into continued revenue increases as well too. So we're looking at that, but we did provide a similar slide to show the cost of the items that are not in the CIP and the estimated yearly debt with that as well. No personnel, obviously, with this project. That's similar to the police station. That does not mean that Public Works and Public Utilities will not need additional personnel in the future. Just this project does not create the need for additional personnel to operate it. So before we go on to the other one, I know there could be more questions, but I do want to echo again what the city manager stated early on. The use of tax equivalency was done as a comparison. As he said, it was showing the overall big picture with this. We have discussed at the staff level alternative ideas. We've mentioned some of those, phasing approach. We've also discussed, could some of these projects be pushed out? But again, if you're going to go back, use the example, if more police fleet vehicles are going to be added, then the supporting ability and Public Works fleet maintenance need to be considered as well in terms of space. So I do know on this particular project, the two directors and their staff are very grateful to have the equipment they want to have, but similar to what Mayor Hook said, they want to make sure they extend the life of it as long as possible as well too.
Well, we also can't neglect the fact that environmental shifts with temperature swings, hurricane storms, things like that. I mean, we're having a way to protect our equipment is becoming more and more crucial, or a better way, I guess, to protect our equipment, I should say.
There's no other questions on that. We'll move on to the next.
I have one question, sorry. Can you talk to me about the 5-year CIP and remind me how long that's been in place and what's the current balance?
So in your budget for the current fiscal year, we have the CIP that was approved by council. We have been working as a staff, and obviously our city manager is going to be reviewing and adjusting adjusting the CIP that's to be expected. It occurs every year. I will point out, I think, your 7th week on the job here, so I don't know that he's had a chance to get to that fully yet. I know he's been working on it, but during the interim phase, we did look at our 5-year CIP and try to make it more financially feasible with the resources we had. So the tentative CIP that could be the basis of what's brought to you in this budget year cycle could look very different from the previous CIP that was approved by council.
So what does 1 million in the 5-year CIP mean? Does it mean we have $1 million sitting somewhere?
So in a CIP, it's projections. In a CIP, there's 2 categories. There is the category of recurring revenue. So you might say, well, for equipment, it's pay as you go, like police cars. We have discussed not financing police cars in the future, using pay as you go recurring revenue for that, because at some point you finance police cars every year. I believe the chief says we have a fleet of about 42, 45. We'd have 45 police cars being financed at once. That does not seem feasible in our staff discussion. So that's an example of something to be paid with recurring or recurring revenue. And then we also have the other category, we use debt. What we have done with our tentative CIP in this budget cycle that has not made it to council yet is we looked at the current fiscal year amount of recurring revenue and the amount of debt issued. And we put a 10% increase on the recurring revenue every year and a 20% increase on the debt amount increasing every year, because we felt like through our growth revenues, factoring in costs, that it could be covered. So I don't have that document in front of me to share with you, but those are our categories, and we have built it off of the current. Our CIP now is built off of our revenue with incremental increases of what we currently have. So I think if you're asking the question, where does the $1 million come from? I can't say specifically where it's coming from. It's in one of those 2 categories, but I don't have the document in front of me.
From the previous slide, do we have $1 million towards this project? Is that what the asterisk
It
is
is in the
implying?
CIP, yes.
Yeah, the CIP is nothing more than a projection for us every year on what we're looking at in the next 5 years. There's no money stored.
No
That's
money.
right.
No
I mean, we
funds.
don't have physical money, but we project we could have funding of
Right,
that.
but
in
we
one of
can't
those
take $1 million
categories.
off of the $8 million total cost because we already have it. We don't have any of this money. It's gonna cost the full $8 million.
You don't have any funding beyond what is in the current year budget,
Right.
but a
Okay.
CIP is a planning tool for the future.
That's going to add, it's a long-range planning tool. Can be 10 years, but we use the first 5 years to be accurate in terms of what we're projecting. Each year you get a chance to revisit that in terms of what your capital
Okay.
expenditures are.
And candidly, even at the end of that 5-year cycle, Councilmember White, it's a projection, but the projection gets fuzzier the further out you
Sure.
get.
Okay, thank you.
We feel more comfortable in year 1 or 2 of a CIP than we do on year 5, because we live in a fluid society.
I looked at that $1,000 on that chart as, you've already been looking at $1 million of this in the CIP for several years. The rest below that has not been in the CIP. It's fresh and new, and we weren't expecting that. So
Yes, it's, that is correct. I mean, I don't want to say we didn't totally expect it, but it hadn't been budgeted and projected in our CIP. But we're getting to a point where, showing on the map on this particular project, we need additional space. In this case, it's not space for new staff, space for current equipment, so. And similar to whether it's garbage trucks, sewer jetback trucks, fire trucks, they take up more space than they used to as well, so. But again, I wanted to stress that this does not mean that's what staff's gonna recommend to you. It's just tax increase equivalency, so. So if no other any other questions for staff on this one? The final other project is one that's been discussed somewhat, I think, been discussed in the past, I think, last year, again, related to the, park project south of the interstate. I think council stressed their priority was, acquiring the land and then building the park with or without an intergenerational recreation center, but we did want to provide this information. In this case, and the Recreation and Parks Director may have things to add to it, but you'll see the standard information we put there where it estimates our one-time cost. You see this is projected to be a 40,000 square foot building. Includes swimming pool. We did consult with outside general contractors. They gave the estimate of 18.5 million. And obviously, there's no site that has been identified. The city has some land, but when you're talking about a 40,000 square foot building, you're also talking about a lot of acres because you have to have a lot of parking spaces or just the rec center itself. It possibly could be incorporated into parkland south of the interstate. We just don't have that far along, so we wanted to show that. But this cost would be in addition to what we showed for park cost. You'll see multiple positions there of what it would cost to run an intergenerational recreation center. I'll have that on the next slide for you. And then the building maintenance and building utilities. Obviously, these are higher numbers than some of the others because this is an indoor facility. So the
How many square feet in the MAC?
the
Ballpark?
I'll let the Recreation and Parks Director share that. I think this is a larger facility. So in this case, some of the discussions we had was just like we need more multi-purpose fields. We probably need more multi-purpose inside space. So I think the Recreation and Parks Director talked about, you'll see here, so it is going to be larger, 4 basketball / athletic courts as opposed to 2 in the MAC. So it is going to be a larger facility than the MAC. So, but it is not a duplicate of the MAC. And a swimming pool makes it large as well. So looking at the staffing levels for the intergenerational recreation center operations, many times we hear would like Mebane to have a YMCA or have a facility operated like a YMCA. So the Parks and Recreation, the Recreation and Parks Director consulted with the Alamance YMCA to do a comparison. He looked at their staffing positions, specifically. Now, obviously, he did not include things like an executive director, finance department, because we already have a finance department. City manager is the equivalent of an executive director. He's already been paid. He didn't even look at his position. He started at the levels from his position down. So you'll see those positions, the current salary requirements or salary grade levels for these positions. He worked with the human resource director to insert those. So that's where that approximate $1.4 million cost came. If the city built an intergenerational facility and operated it just like a YMCA, which sometimes the city has heard is the desire, that's the staffing level it would take. So that was part of his research there. And again, we did the same format for you in this, showing the debt issue, the yearly debt, calculated again at the interest rate. You'll see the tax equivalency of that. You'll see that again, it's similar to another fire station. We don't think our regular revenues could incorporate or handle adding $1.4 million worth of staff. That's just not a feasible alternative. So you'll see the equivalency of that through tax equivalency. And then also it has been discussed, and city manager or the Recreation and Parks Director can discuss this, but at the bottom, it's been discussed about having a separate senior center. So again, basing similar size, let's say a duplicate building right beside it, but then also understanding that has to be staffed as well. Now, the Recreation and Parks Director did say he thought the facility superintendent, if they were side by side, could oversee both buildings. So that was taken out. So it's not a double the equivalent of the 6.1 cents tax equivalency. But if you build a separate senior center, it's estimated to build an intergenerational center and a senior center to be equivalency of 11.54 tax equivalency.
There's no consideration in here of the fees that are charged. So but that's such a small impact on the total picture. The fees you collect for like swim lessons and basketball stuff. So what would that be? 20% of the budget,
Would it be
I-
that high?
I'll defer to the Recreation and Parks Director, but, I think that's too high of an estimate. I think, you know, unless you have a fitness center, you're probably talking at most maybe, I'll defer to him, but maybe approximately $100,000 worth of revenue coming in.
Yeah, our annual revenue as it is now is somewhere in the $180,000 range, and that's with a lot of rentals that, quite honestly, we're gonna start doing less of now. So program fees, I mean, maybe 10% would be a better guesstimate.
So hypothetically speaking, I feel like I've heard the staffing piece of this is something where there could be a partnership opportunity if we explored avenues with that in theory, if we were able to find a partnership that we liked, that worked for the city, that could at least alleviate the salary portion of this, or is that?
It could, you know, to your point, an alternative on that could be, do we find private sector opportunities to partner with or completely run the equivalent of a intergenerational recreation center? That, you know, there are options out there. I don't know that, you know, again, the city manager shared the focus today was the overall perspective. But I do think, I don't know that you can go out and find a private sector entity to run a police station for you. But I do think there's alternatives to go out and find a private sector or entity to run the equivalent, or a nonprofit run the equivalent of a intergenerational rec center. So you are correct with that.
I guess the risk there being, though, the fees that could be associated with it, to go and use as a city resident would likely be different than what we would have if it was all city owned and operated, right?
Yeah, even if you found a partnership, let's say we built a facility and the Y agreed to run it, then people are gonna have to buy Y memberships.
Right.
You just can't come up with $1.6 million in people without somebody paying for it. So if we went with a private company, they're gonna have to charge membership fees to recoup 100% of 1.6 million. So, I don't know that that's a cheaper alternative unless we want to just drop the burden back on the citizens to pay for the privilege to use their multi or intergenerational recreation center.
I think Councilmember Burkholder, as you mentioned, Mayor Pro Tem Bradley, there's two alternatives that you both referenced there. One could be, as you said, somebody run it, but there's costs associated with that, or it could be that a private entity could run the entire operation and we not be involved in the building or the operations of it as well too.
And there has been conversations with several people about that, but I have noticed historically, bond referendums for recreation programs are passed probably 75% of the time. So, you know, this might be singularly a good one to do, you know, if we want to do a bond on that.
I feel like it's the number one thing I get asked about.
Yeah, I agree.
If,
All right.
if a group of seniors is passionate about this, could volunteering help reduce the employment costs, or is that a very difficult road?
So I'll let the city attorney speak, but there'd be liability issues if you had, part of running a recreation center is you have to have a qualified and trained person to offer these programs as well too. So, there is some liability with volunteers offering them.
So we've ran some quick numbers. The MAC is about 30,000 square feet. So, and also that list that Preston just had up there, you know, those are all options, but they're real options for what a YMCA type facility would offer. So if we're gonna go down that road, you know, obviously we would get to essentially pick and choose what we may do when it comes to, swim lessons or after school programs or summer day camps or things like that. But those are things I think you all alluded to that we hear about those all the time. So we wanted to provide all the options with this estimate.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? If not, let's take a 20-minute break. Who's up?
So Mayor, this is our last topic of our list, and we have our finance director back to talk about a fund balance.
All right. So some of the slides in this section will be familiar because they were in the audit presentation. But we'll start out showing you the fund balance components broken out for the last 5 audited fiscal years. So if you look on the left, let's see if I can use this red thing. Oh, good. There are different categories of fund balance. And this first one is non-spendable. So that would be like any prepaid expenses, like prepaid insurance and things like that. I've tried to eliminate that the last couple years, so we haven't had any. Then you have restricted, which the majority of this is restricted by state stabilization statute. The state requires us to restrict a portion of our fund balance that needs to be used to pay bills that are owed at the end of the year, and also any restricted funds such as grants and things like that would be also be in this number. Committed, the city doesn't have any committed fund balance, but what that is if the council would commit any funds to a certain project or anything like that, that would fall into committed. And then assigned means really assigned to the next fiscal year. So this represents what is appropriated fund balance in the budget for the next fiscal year. So here you see 2.3 is part of the assigned fund balance for fiscal year 23-24. So that was the beginning fund balance appropriated for fiscal year 24-25. And then you have a unassigned fund balance, which is everything else. And that's available for the council to appropriate. And then you have total fund balance. So per our fund balance policy, the policy says that the percentage that we want to have 33% of total expenditures and transfers in our fund balance at the end of the year. And so this line here is that calculated percentage based on our fund balance policy. And so you see we were at 53% at the end of fiscal year 24. So we were well above our 33% policy. However,
How do you get 53%? What's the numerator and what's the denominator?
so the numerator would be committed, assigned, and unassigned added together, and the denominator is the total expenditures and transfers. And then I've provided this line here, which is showing just the unassigned. And so currently, like I said, the policy has us add committed, assigned, and unassigned together to see if that equals 33%. But if it's committed, it's not really available to spend on anything but what it's committed for. And if it's assigned to the next fiscal year, then it's assigned to be spent the next fiscal year, and it's been used to balance the budget for the next fiscal year. So that's not really available to spend because you can't spend it twice. And so I wanted to show what the percentage would be with unassigned. And if you just use unassigned, which is the 14 million here, divided by the expenditures and transfers, you would get 46%, which is still above our fund balance policy of 33%.
Daphne, not to belabor this, but I just want to make 100% sure I understand too. Unassigned has no strings attached. Like that That money is basically the money that we have in the bank account, so to speak, to do whatever with, and we've just got it there. It's not earmarked for anything. It's not tagged for anything. It's just sitting there.
Right, it's not, correct, it's not been assigned to anything, it's not linked to anything. It's what you would have available to budget.
Great, thanks.
And so this slide is looking at the last 5 audited years plus the current year. And it's showing where we started every year with appropriated fund balance, and then where we ended every year with appropriated fund balance. And as you can see, it's been, the ending fund balance has been creeping up over time, as well as the beginning has been creeping up over time. We worked last year to lower the assigned fund balance for FY25, but it had been creeping up steadily. And it had been creeping up steadily for the final. And right now, this year, we're lower than last year at about 4.6 million assigned. And if you notice at the top of here, you have your appropriated fund balance, assigned appropriated fund balance that's in the budget ordinance that is adopted. And then the budget ordinance also says that we can roll over purchase orders that are outstanding as of 6/30. And so that's what this line is that all the purchase orders that were still outstanding at the end of the year are rolled over. And then the carry forward dollars are dollars that staff came to council to ask to be rolled forward and were approved and for specific projects. So that's why every year you see purchase orders rolled over, and every year you see carry forward dollars, which pretty much right away elevates the fund balance that's been appropriated in the budget. It adds on, and that's all that's been added this year to bring us to almost 4.6 million in appropriated fund balance. Another thing I wanted to point out on this slide is, I don't know if you recall, but during the audit presentation, we talked about, what's the right amount of fund balance to assign or appropriate. And we talked about how ideally, in a perfect world, you wouldn't appropriate any, but generally, the rule of thought is that if you appropriate any, it should be used for capital. But we've kind of strayed away from that. Even if you look at the beginning of fund balance, it shows down here the original capital budget that was not funded with debt or grants. And it's much less than the appropriated fund balance. So, which means that it's being potentially spent on things that are not capital. That's just comparing beginning. So let's look at this, almost 2.8, and we only had about 1.4 in capital. Here we have 2.3 that we appropriated at the beginning, and we only had about $1 million in capital. So that's where we're kind of off a little bit. This slide I presented at the audit presentation. It just was a different color. So this is just going over the fact that we did add to fund balance in the general fund. In fiscal year 24, we added about almost 1.3 million, but we rolled purchase orders over at almost 1.9 million, and then we did carry forward dollars. And so if those dollars had been spent, which they were initially intended to be spent in fiscal year 24, if they had been spent, then the city would have used about $1 million in fund balance. Now we'll look at the same thing in the utility fund. Just wanted to point out that the utility fund is a proprietary or business type fund, so it technically doesn't have a fund balance. And the closest measurement to a fund balance in the utility fund is unrestricted net position. And so that's what we'll be looking at. So here are the last 5 audited years. And if you see here, this is the utility fund unrestricted net position across the top. Then I have included here the capital project ordinance funds unrestricted net position, and these are the project funds for utilities that we have to include here. And so then you have total proprietary funds unrestricted net position. And if we look at that in comparison to the expenditures and transfers for our fund balance policy, that puts us at 63%, which is way above the 33% policy. And our policy actually says to use only unrestricted net position as a comparison, but it really doesn't show the full picture. And I think that part of the policy was written before we had a lot of capital project ordinances in the utility fund, so it made sense at that time. But we may think about changing it because it really doesn't show the whole picture unless you bring in the capital project ordinance unrestricted net position.
Going back to the general fund, which where do we see each year how much we end up putting back into fund balance?
It is not on this slide.
You got it on one slide.
Oh.
Go forward. I'm sorry. You have it on one.
We could,
There
I
you
guess, we could growth in fund balance from year to year, that also includes interest. But after all things are said and done and spent, we normally put some money, a couple of years, in fund balance.
Right, so that's seen here. As you go up.
Without considering the
That includes interest.
No.
rollover and everything too.
That would include interest earned because it's all of our cash.
So like in 21, 22, we had to write out a $5 million growth in fund balance. Does that mean we put $5 million?
Excuse me, Tim, could you please turn on your mic? I'm sorry, because they can't
I'm
hear you
sorry.
online.
Yes. And just like this year, we added fund balance also, but every year we're also rolling forward these purchase orders as well.
Yeah, but even after we roll forward the purchase orders, what we end up adding to fund balance comes later in the year. We never know at budget time
Correct.
what we're planning, what we're expecting to put into rollover into fund balance. that year.
Correct. Correct.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I'll just add that one year where you see the big increase, I think that was some of the COVID pandemic 19 impacted budget from the state advised all local governments to budget very conservatively and.
I think I'd asked for that in the past. I think it's good for us to look at patterns, and one of the patterns is, how much do we actually put into fund balance every year? And we normally put money into it, which is encouraging.
It's rare when you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess
Yeah.
that gives me an idea of what safely we can use out of fund. Like we used 2.4 million last year to balance the budget out of fund balance. But we ended up after the year was over putting 500,000, but we don't know yet because we hadn't finished the year. Well, if we end up putting $500,000 into fund balance that year, after all things were said and done, then you're looking at, well, actually, our fund balance would have safely grown 3 million if we hadn't used it to offset the budget. So, I mean, just that's helpful to me. I don't know about anybody else, but
Yeah, and I think, but that's also why I showed this slide because I just wanted you to be fully aware that if we had spent all the money that we intended to spend in fiscal year 24, we would have actually used fund balance.
Yeah,
And
but
so
we
now
never
it's been
do.
pushed.
Yeah.
Right, but now it's been pushed forward to this year, so we'll spend it this year.
We never have.
Yeah,
Right.
we never have spent all of it, everything we budgeted.
Right, yeah, I'm just
That's like
saying the
trash.
1.8 million will be spent this year, and so I'm just showing that we had prepared to spend more than what we brought in.
Well, when we come down, the reason I like seeing is when we come down to the final decisions on budget and we're looking at what we want to appropriate from fund balance this year to balance it. And I have, that gives me an area of where I think we should feel comfortable saying if we approach that, we're still going to do better than break even. If we go over that amount, the average of that amount, then we're going to lose fund balance this year. We're going to go down in our fund balance, which is rare, really.
But I do think one thing she pointed out on her slide is we have, over the past few years, we lowered it this year. We have been increasing our fund balance appropriation. So that's probably not the best. Your point is on June 30th, we did have an increase, but it's probably not a good position to keep increasing fund balance appropriation every year as well, too.
No. I agree. You reach a saturation point where you're gonna increase the use of your fund balance to the point where you're gonna actually take away from fund balance after all things are said and done. We haven't done that normally. Normally, we appropriate amount, then after all things are said and done, we spent less than we said we were gonna appropriate, so we actually ended up adding to fund balance. I think if I recall, there was one year we didn't do that, but most of the time we do.
Yeah, and if you look at this expenditure pattern in all of the audit presentations, normally departments don't spend all of their funds, and some of that is rolled over, but it's our expenditures are usually lower than what we budgeted.
And collections are higher normally.
Collections recently have been either on target. Some categories have been higher, some have been on target, and some have been lower. So that's more of a mix, but overall expenditures are always below.
Well, last year's sales tax surprised us, but normally, I mean, if you look at an average over the years, the expenditures have been less and the income's been more than we projected.
Our expenditures have almost doubled in the past 5 years, from 15.8 to 30.8. That trend can't continue. That trend can't continue.
Yeah. That's what you're looking at here. Yeah. The sharp increase.
Well, that depends on if your income's increasing in the same pattern.
Well, but our percentages are going down because our fund balance might be staying pretty level or increasing, but because the expenditures are increasing so quickly, our percentage for fund balance is going down.
Well, we said all along that, the smaller the budget, the easier it is to keep a higher percentage of your fund balance. The higher your budget goes to, if we had said we're going to maintain a 55% fund balance 25 years ago, that wouldn't have been a problem. It would be now because our budget's so much higher. Right.
When you can't neglect the amount of inflation that's been a factor in those 5 years as well.
So this is the similar slide that I showed for the general fund is you have the original appropriated fund balance. And then you have the rollover of purchase orders and carry forward dollars. And then the final appropriated fund balance and the capital budget for the beginning of the year. And so there was an increase. There's a big increase in 2023, or actually a big increase in 22, and then it's gone down. And then we're back up again, but we have the wharf expansion project. That was a big chunk. So right now we're at almost 4.7 million of appropriated fund balance in the utility fund. Oops, sorry. And with the capital budget only being a little under 500,000 from the beginning. So if you look at, we appropriated 2.3 million in the utility fund, but the capital budget was only a little under 500,000. So that's a big discrepancy. And so the fund balance addition for the utility fund was $173,099. We rolled over $700,000 of purchase orders. And so if we had spent that in FY24, we would have used a little over 500,000 in fund balance. So in summary, there are 5 components of the general fund balance, and it's important to pay attention to the different components. Utility fund does not have a fund balance. The closest measurement is unrestricted net position. We're trying to get our fund balance to not appropriate as much every year. One of the goals we're looking at is to make it equal to capital expenditures. We're also looking at other options for the future as far as fund balance, such as having a fund balance appropriation for both funds be equal or less than our cash outlay for capital, for the fund balance to be 5% of total expenses of each individual fund, for the equal amount of annual recurring capital item funding and expenses, 5% of the unassigned fund balance or unassigned net position of each individual fund, or a zero allocation, and only use it for unique one-time capital items or purchases. Those are things we're looking at for fund balance in the future. So we're going to also examine the fund balance policy, as I had mentioned in a couple of the slides, and possibly recommend changes to use unassigned fund balance instead of unrestricted fund balance for the general fund, and total proprietary funds fund net position instead of the utility fund's net position. Those are things that we might be bringing back to you.
So, Mayor and Council, that concludes our presentation. At this point, we would like to open up for any additional questions you might have or any further discussion. But what we'd hope you'd help us do is to look at these projects and give us some indication of the priority, because these projects will definitely inform our budget planning moving forward. And I would say that the only one of these that probably could potentially impact our FY26 budget would be the purchase of land for the park. But the other these items will take us some time to really factor this into our financial planning. And this is years of work in terms of we need to look years ahead to really make sure how all these projects will interact with the city's budget moving forward. So that's what I ask you to do at this point. If you have any other questions that you need to ask of us, or if you consider looking at these projects and give us some feedback on where the priorities may lie.
I'll just make a few comments. With the price of land and the scarcity of land, I think if we get a good opportunity to purchase land for park south of the interstate, we should pursue it. Doesn't mean we necessarily have to construct the park. It could have walking trails for a few years, but we can never have a park if we don't have land. And I know you all are looking at those opportunities. I would encourage you to continue to do that. And if a good option comes available, I'd be excited by that. In terms of the rest of the projects and overall priorities, I see strong arguments for, but also challenges against all of them, just from a financial perspective. And I just don't feel like I know how to prioritize them. I could make case in my own mind for all sorts of different orders of these projects, and I'll certainly want to have more discussion on staff as to how to do that, because it's not obvious to me. What is really the right thing to do for our citizens with our tax money to accomplish these goals. I think they're all good plans. They're all exciting, but they're all super expensive, and that's the hard job we have to do.
I think one thing I'm also thinking about is how long we've been talking about some of these as well. And I'm getting a little tired of talking about them, and I would like for us to start doing them. Now, what order that is, I don't know yet, like Jonathan said. But Fire Station 4, police station. Um, I agree about the public works utility shed at the very least, right? But I definitely think that the future facility plan needs to be also looked at. And in addition to the park, we've I feel like I talk to so many citizens about a park on the south side and a intergenerational rec center and a pool for the community. And I like the idea of possibly exploring a bond for the intergenerational rec center, just as a way to kind of kick that one in the pants, so to speak, and get that moving maybe a little bit quicker because it is carrying a hefty price tag. I don't know, but I I'm ready to see some of this stuff moving.
When we prioritize, when everything's priority number one, nothing is. I'd like to really start seeing some timelines, some expectations of timelines, some metrics, rubrics, as far as how we can best prioritize this, and obviously work with the public to understand what we should be prioritizing. Again, it sounds like land, we're going to be getting some land soon for some of these items, and we don't necessarily know when. I'd like to better understand the urgencies of the departments, and what the expectations are. Priority, Maslow's hierarchy, safety is number one here in Mebane. So I want to make sure everyone is staying safe here. Um, Better understanding, yeah, what opportunities are available in the future. And I would actually, one thing that's kind of outside of that Maslow's hierarchy would be what Mr. White was saying, was if we can get any land for a community park south of the interstate. I think that would be a phenomenal opportunity right there, because like you said, land's getting gobbled up left and right. So any opportunity to help prioritize this would be really, really welcomed.
And, just looking at the list, I would think, if I had to, you were thinking about us ranking them is what you were saying. I would say immediate would be, Public Works, utility shed number one, based on the example they gave with, equipment needing to be protected and things of that nature. Then I would look at, probably number two would be, well, like, Councilman White said, when you keep an eye out like you're doing for land on the south side for a park, and maybe if you come across a good deal. And then we look at, maybe police. I agree with Ms. Burkholder as well about a bond, things of that nature, see what the public would want to do. In that case, and maybe that would take up the recreation center and even the park. Because I know with Bucky's coming, of course, Fire Station 4, we're gonna have to do something, but if we're looking at this year's budget, I would say number one priority is that shed number one. And then we keep talking about the other items like we've been doing over the past couple of years.
Well, my opinion is, we're adding 400 front doors a year. We just approved the Curry Center, right off of Collingwood Hallfield Road, which is the furthest reach point for either one of our fire stations. So my feelings are, we've added the burden by approving developments, which I know we don't have much choice, but we've added the burden of improving developments to our police infrastructure, our fire infrastructure, and our public works infrastructure. We've taken care of WRF, because we've already invested the money for that, but that's why we invested, is because of the growth. I'm all for a park. I'm all for an intergenerational recreation center, but I believe strongly that we need to put our priority on our infrastructure, because once you get behind on infrastructure, we were already looking at a situation on West 10, where we had a big company wanting to come in. We couldn't cover it with fire protection because we weren't close enough with our fire station. I think they finally worked out that the driveway was exactly 5 miles, but police department, we've been talking about a substation. I would say just as soon as we can move on Fire Station 4, and just as soon as we can move on police station, and I know we're waiting on the correlation of the land with the developer and the public works, we should move on all three of those. If we don't keep up with our infrastructure, we're going to be in trouble. That's just my priorities.
Can we not get, I mean, if we already know that the land has been promised, it was a condition, and I believe in those instances, the applicants have completed their purchase of the land. I know they have not gone through the process of donating it to us, but can we not go ahead and get the ball rolling on some of this while we wait for that? If that's not going to take too long?
On the Buckhorn situation, there was a restrictive covenant that was put in place so that the city would be restricted to the fire station. And then we asked them to expand that to a water tank, and they agreed to that. Their attorney asked me, were we ready? I told them, yes, send me a draft of the final documents on the Buckhorn. As Preston indicated, the one on the west side, they're still working through their plan, but I think the Buckhorn we'll see here in the next 30 days, so that we'll take title to that for that fire station.
And then what
But the
about the
discussion-
police station site? Sorry.
Chief indicated the station, the west
West was
station
big.
there at
That's correct,
Buckus.
and that's the one that the developer who indicated he was going to, that they would give that land. They're still working through some logistic plans with Duke Energy, as Mr. Mitchell indicated.
Okay.
And then what about the Evolve site for the police station?
They're going through construction plans, but as Mr. Brown has advised, and I think it's correct, we can't accept land until a street is built to it. We have to have access to it. So that site is not on, is similar to the Eastern Fire Station site. It's not on a street right now. The street has to be built. But I don't think that street being constructed is slowing down any planning with a police station.
Okay, that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get at
At
is,
staff level, we don't feel like that's the case. I mean, if you were talking about a bond, I'll defer to Mr. White on that, but that might, and the finance director, but that might be a 2 or 3 year process.
I don't know that,
Well, it takes, but even if it was not a bond, other actions, it takes a couple years to start a project of this nature.
right.
So, based on if the Evolve project went away, yes, that would be a concern, but based on them being in construction plans, and their timelines they have discussed with us, we just have to wait, and I can get Mr. Brown to explain that about why we wouldn't accept it until the actual road was built. First of all, I think it would cause some issues with our own regulations, but there's also a risk with it as well, too. If you want to expand on that, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, we didn't want to take title to any of it until the road was built and all the utility infrastructure was in place. And the utility infrastructure is in place on Buckhorn now. So it's just a question of getting the closing documents approved and recorded. But as to the other two sites that you've mentioned and we've been discussing, it will take the construction of the utilities and the construction of the road to enable us. I wouldn't feel comfortable with us taking title to property that didn't have the adequate utilities and adequate road access to it.
Doesn't the location on Parkson Drive, or near Bucky's, doesn't it have the infrastructure in?
Bucky's does have the infrastructure. Mr. Mitchell's been talking with that developer about the Duke substation and exactly where they want to put us now, as opposed to on the corner.
We need to move them on that. You're getting,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're getting ready to open Bucky's,
Corey's.
the Corey Center, and a major new interchange with quadruple the traffic. And our, particularly our fire, but even our police, that's gonna change the network of emergency response, as is Public Works response to it, or service in that area. But Bucky's, if you've ever been to Sevierville, that's a game changer for an area. And
You don't want to be building a fire station after they open.
we don't want it open without.
Might be a car or two that will hinder things. I'm not sure we have a consensus on any of this, but we've been talking about all of it. Fire station probably is the fire rating, the response times, those kind of things are what I think drives the necessity for another station. So that's why I like the west part of it versus the east. But we're losing industry not having something on the east. So there's pros and cons. I think the recreation center, there's been a lot of discussions, particularly Preston and I, on other funding sources like a YMCA, that kind of stuff. I want that to continue. The hospitals, Cone, or whoever else is coming to Mebane to see if there's some kind of partnership we can do with them that helps out with the money. And the park south of the interstate is a necessity. The problem now is, I think land is very expensive. I'm not sure how far out we have to go to get a sizable piece of property to develop. So sooner on that than later, as far as I'm concerned. And construction can come out later. But anyway, does that help your priority, sir?
It does.
But I'm talking about the council that counts. They're the ones that count.
Yes, you've given us feedback, so we're gonna consider this and figure out how to move forward. So yes, this is helpful.
All right, the staff's going to develop funding strategies and alternative ideas. So anything else from the council?
It would help me to see all of these numbers for these projects on a single page so I can compare them without scrolling back and forth. And maybe with the removal of the capital project ordinance money from the park south of the interstate, because if we don't do that one first, then that money could go to one of the other projects. So we should probably remove that so they're all on equal footing.
Anything else?
I'll just note next steps. First of all, I want to say thank you to Daphne and to Preston and our management team for the work they've done getting us this far. There's a lot of work they put into this to present this today, so I just want to say thank you to all of them. Secondly, say thanks as well because they have been working also on the FY26 budget, and we're ahead of schedule. I hesitate to say that, but they tell me that we're ahead of schedule with that budget development process as well. But we'll be back to you on March 13th for our next work session on the budget, and also the 20th. Those will be the departmental presentations. So we're working on getting that together for that, and then you'll have your last work session scheduled for April 10th. So we're working on FY26 and look forward to bringing that back on the 13th with departmental presentations. So thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else brought to the council? If not, the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor.
You got it.
Thank you, John.
I was asked to